Yes, well, Lisa, I'm still trying to get my head around the choice of electives for the optional part of the third-year program. I was thinking of taking personal taxation law and company tax, together with the extra 5 credit point course on goods and services and VAT type taxes. But I'm a bit concerned that I'm going to pigeonhole myself too early in the course. As you know, there are going to be interviews for summer clerkships coming up, and I really don't want to come across as too focused on certain areas that a lot of firms don't even have a practice in. Well, don't forget, only about 25% of the course at this stage is elective-based, and you'll still have that core of subjects: crim, legal institutions, evidence, property law, general commercial, and FedCon law, all of which would be of interest to a lot of firms. So if I were you, which I'm not, I'd really just go with what my interests are and enjoy the chance to undertake some work in an area that I'm motivated to pursue. Don't you think? There's an awful lot of time in this profession where you'll be undertaking long, stressful hours on projects that don't really interest you as much.
Animals' ability to blend into the background was imitated in a military context as a means of disguising soldiers and equipment. They were camouflaged so as not to be recognized by the enemy. Indeed, the word itself, from the French word camoufler, meaning to disguise, was first introduced into the English language during World War I. The concept of camouflage was further extended to include the supply of incorrect information intended to confuse the enemy. For example, decoys were used to distract attention in the wrong direction. In these examples, we can clearly see how humankind has learnt from the animal world.
Bayesian mimicry is the term given to describe the process whereby animals mimic a threatening or indible species. This can be achieved through changes in appearance, behavior, sound, or scent, thus enabling the animals to give deceptive information about their identity. In this way, animals avoid being preyed upon. Conversely, predators use aggressive resemblance. They appear to be harmless and so are able to lure their prey. Think of the mantis flower with its orchid-like appearance, or a leopard lying in tall grass.
Animals use concealing coloration as a form of protection in order to disguise their location or identity and guard against their predators. This can take many forms. One type is background matching, where the prey takes on colors and textures which allow them to visually resemble their surroundings and blend with the environment. Chameleons, for example, can change their skin color by exploiting chromatophores, the pigment and light-reflecting cells which produce skin color, in order to match the background.
Governor Rell and the Democrats do agree on the need for other urgent reforms, including more re-entry programs and jobs training and better monitoring after prisoners are released on probation and parole. Connecticut has 2,500 parolees, but a staggering 55,000 people on probation. Probation officers handle an average of 107 cases, each far too many. Connecticut's system for sharing crime information, which could keep some of the most dangerous offenders off the streets, is antiquated. It has neither inpatient treatment for sex offenders nor housing for them once they are released. Hundreds of former inmates are on a waiting list for inpatient drug treatment. The suspect arrested in the New Britain case had been staying in a homeless shelter at night, but roaming freely during the day while waiting to begin outpatient sex offender treatment. Returning released inmates to society with so little support makes no sense.
Two horrifying crimes have exposed serious weaknesses in Connecticut's criminal justice system. But a 3 strikes and you're out law proposed by Gov. M. Jody Rell and Republicans in the legislature would do more harm than good. Last July, 2 recently paroled men broke into a home in Cheshire and tortured and murdered 3 people. Last month, a man who served more than 8 years for assaulting a 5-year-old and had been out on probation for less than a month broke into a New Britain home. He accosted 2 women, wounding one and killing the other. Republicans, led by Ms. Rell, have responded by calling for a 3 strikes law. Democrats have rightly resisted. The proposed law, which would mandate life in prison for anyone convicted of 3 violent felonies, is a bumper sticker solution that would create injustices by bearing judges' discretion in sentencing. It would also not deter the many crimes committed by people who have not committed 3 violent felonies.
Crime in the United States accounts for more death, injuries, and loss of property than all natural disasters combined. The Disaster Center is pleased to be able to provide you with access to the statistics of crime compiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When you experience a crime, it can make you respond in ways that you might not understand. In that crisis situation, you may react in ways that conflict with the assumptions you have created about yourself. At the time of the crime, you may feel a sense of helplessness, fear, and anger. Afterward, you may have a hard time relating the experience to the context of the assumptions of your life. A conflict often develops between your idea of the world before the crime and your idea of the world after the disaster. On top of this, the victims and their relatives often experience financial problems, and time is often lost from work to handle the legal, insurance, and personal problems associated with being a victim. The trauma associated with any crime often makes it hard for victims to cope with normal daily routines. And the victims of crime are frequently blamed by their friends for not being more careful. The trauma continues as victims of crime often find themselves ignored by law enforcement and confused by the court system. Coca-Cola has bucked the trend for celebrity-fronted advertising by choosing a virtually unknown British artist to front one of its biggest UK campaigns. While arch-rival Pepsi features the likes of David Beckham and Beyonce Knowles in its campaigns, Coca-Cola has hired the Basement Jaxx vocalist Charlene Hector to star in its first ever UK branding campaign for Coca-Cola Classic. The advert breaks tomorrow and features Hector singing the Nina Simone classic, I Wish, as she walks through the streets distributing bottles of Coca-Cola. It is the latest in the company's new Real campaign, which took over from the Always Coca-Cola adverts and is aimed at giving the brand a more irreverent image. The actress Penelope Cruz has appeared belching after drinking Coke in adverts in the US. The new advertising is the first campaign to be created by the quirky British advertising agency Mother, which won the Coca-Cola business last year after pitching against the company's pitching US agency, McCann Erickson. The agency had already created campaign for Coca-Cola-owned created Lilt, Oasis, and Schweppes, and was charged with coming up with a specifically British approach to the world's best-known brand. The strategy is part of the Coca-Cola chairman and chief executive Douglas Daff's so-called Think Local, Act Local philosophy, inspired by the realization that what works for American philosophy will not necessarily succeed elsewhere.
Historically, reasons for the migration of Asians to the United States were similar in some ways to those for the Atlantic migration of Europeans, to escape from poverty and civil war, and to find employment opportunity and freedom. Chinese laborers were recruited to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the mid-19th century and provide domestic services in cities such as San Francisco. They were followed by the Japanese and Filipinos in the early 20th century, who labored in Hawaiian plantations, California farms, and Alaskan canneries. Of these early Asian Americans, only the Japanese were allowed to immigrate as families at the insistence of the Japanese government. For these early generations, Asians in America were largely bachelor communities of temporary sojourners, with male-to-female ratios as high as 10-to-1. Asian American children in those early years were rare. Since 1970, the demography of this population has changed tremendously. In 2002, Asian Americans were slightly more than 4% of the U.S. population. The growth of the Asian American population since 1970 is due in great part to the elimination of exclusionary immigration policies that existed before 1965, implementation of new refugee statutes directly flowing from the Vietnam War, and the rise of second and subsequent U.S.-born generations. In 1970, there were 1.5 million Asian Americans. This amounts to an 8-fold to 9-fold increase in little more than 30 years.
Cities and towns are not only growing in size and number, they are also gaining new influence. The urban transition offers significant opportunities to improve the quality of life, but whether this potential is realized depends critically on how cities are managed and on the national and local policies affecting their development. The development of urban areas is also closely linked to the rural economy through the exchange of labor, goods, services, information, and technology. Neglecting urban issues leads to significant social and environmental costs, however. In the two most urbanized regions that the World Bank serves, Latin America and Europe/Central Asia, over half of the poor already live in urban areas. By 2025, two-thirds of the poor in these regions and one-third of the poor in East and South Asia will reside in cities or towns. The nature of urban poverty is more than an income or employment issue and is also characterized by squalid living conditions, risks to life and health from poor sanitation, air pollution, crime and violence, traffic accidents and natural disasters, and the breakdown of traditional familial and communal safety nets. Urban populations are also particularly hard hit by macro-financial shocks, such as the recent crises in East Asia and Russia. Urban environmental degradation has the most immediate effects on poor urban residents, but also has serious national and global impacts.
Like, share and subscribe the channel for upcoming videos and also press the bell icon for notifications.